Welcome, gentle viewer, to another journey through the mists of time. Tonight, we drift back 700 to 1,000 years, to an era when the very act of washing one's body carried whispers of danger, when water itself was viewed with suspicion, and when cleanliness meant something entirely different from what we understand today. Before we begin our exploration of medieval hygiene, I must offer a gentle disclaimer. What follows are historical generalizations drawn from scattered records, chronicles, and medical texts. The medieval world was vast and varied, stretching across centuries and continents, and experiences differed greatly between regions, social classes, and time periods. Some of the details we'll encounter tonight may seem strange or even unsettling to modern sensibilities, but I'll deliver them as gently as possible, like candlelight illuminating shadows from long ago. So settle in, perhaps with a warm cup of tea, and prepare to discover a world where the relationship between water and wellness was far more complicated than we might imagine. Tonight, we'll explore why our ancestors feared the very thing we now consider essential for health, and how their understanding of cleanliness shaped centuries of human experience. In the medieval mind, water was not the friend to health that we consider it today. Instead, it was viewed with deep suspicion, even terror. To understand why, we must first grasp the medical theories that dominated medieval thinking. The concept of miasma, or bad air, was central to medieval understanding of disease. Physicians and common folk alike believed that illness spread through corrupted air, through vapors that could seep into the body and cause harm. Water, particularly warm water, was thought to be especially dangerous because it was believed to open the pores of the skin. Medieval doctors taught that when the pores opened, they created direct pathways for disease to enter the body. The skin, they believed, was a protective barrier, and anything that compromised this barrier was inherently risky. Hot baths, in particular, were seen as invitations for pestilence to invade the body through these newly opened doorways. This fear was not entirely unfounded, given the realities of medieval life. The water sources available to most people were often contaminated with waste, both human and animal. Rivers running through cities carried sewage, dead animals, and the refuse of countless trades. Wells were frequently tainted by nearby latrines. The connection between dirty water and illness was observed even if the mechanisms were not understood. What medieval people didn't realize was that the danger lay not in the water opening mystical pores, but in the waterborne pathogens that could cause very real diseases. The Roman legacy of bathing culture had not entirely disappeared in early medieval Europe, but it had been transformed and diminished. Some Roman bathhouses continued to function in certain regions, particularly in areas that had been heavily Romanized. However, the elaborate bath complexes, with their sophisticated heating systems and social functions, gradually fell into disrepair as the infrastructure that supported them crumbled. As the medieval period progressed, the Church began to view the Roman tradition of public bathing with increasing suspicion. The early Christian emphasis on spiritual purity over physical cleanliness contributed to this shift. Saints and holy men were often praised for their rejection of worldly comforts, including bathing. The mortification of the flesh was seen as a path to spiritual enlightenment, and this extended to the deliberate neglect of bodily cleanliness. The cold rivers and streams that served as natural bathing spots presented their own dangers. Medieval people were keenly aware that exposure to cold water could lead to illness, and they were not wrong. Without adequate shelter, warm clothing, or proper nutrition, a plunge into a cold river could indeed prove fatal. The risk of hypothermia was very real, and the connection between cold water and death was observed repeatedly. Yet, despite these fears, some bathing did continue. The key was understanding when and how it was considered safe. Certain times of year, particularly the warmer months, were deemed more appropriate for water contact. Some religious festivals included ritual washing, though this was carefully prescribed and limited. The fear of water was not absolute, but it was persistent and shaped by both practical experience and theoretical understanding. The story of public bathhouses in medieval Europe is one of rise, transformation, and eventual decline. In the 12th century, communal bathhouses began to appear in growing numbers across European cities. These establishments, often called stews in English, offered a service that was both practical and social. They provided access to warm water and bathing facilities that individual households could not afford to maintain. Early medieval bathhouses were remarkable places. Picture stepping into one of these establishments in a bustling city of the 13th century. The air would be thick with steam, heavy with the scent of herbs and the murmur of conversation. These were not merely places to wash, but social hubs where people gathered to relax, conduct business, and share news. The wealthy might rent private chambers, while common folk shared larger communal pools. The architecture of these bathhouses reflected their dual purpose. They were designed to be both functional and comfortable, with stone floors that could withstand constant moisture, wooden tubs that could be heated, and sometimes even crude plumbing systems that channeled hot water from central boilers. The more elaborate establishments featured multiple rooms, allowing for different temperatures and levels of privacy. What made these bathhouses particularly notable was their practice of mixed-gender bathing. Men and women would often share the same pools, a practice that would become increasingly controversial as medieval society evolved. These communal spaces fostered a kind of social intimacy that was perhaps unique in medieval life. Business deals were struck, marriages arranged, and gossip shared in the warm, steamy environment of the bathhouse. The social aspect of bathhouses cannot be overstated. In an era when most people lived in cramped, dark quarters, the bathhouse offered space, light, and comfort. It was a place where social hierarchies might be temporarily relaxed, where the merchant and the artisan might share the same warm water. For many, the weekly or monthly visit to the bathhouse was a highlight of social life. However, this very social nature would eventually contribute to the bathhouse's downfall. The church, already suspicious of communal bathing for its associations with pagan Roman practices, became increasingly alarmed by the moral implications of mixed-gender bathing. Sermons began to denounce the bathhouses as dens of sin, places where the promiscuous mingling of bodies led inevitably to the corruption of souls. The association between bathhouses and prostitution began to solidify during the 13th and 14th centuries. While not all bathhouses were brothels, the warm, intimate atmosphere and the presence of both men and women in various states of undress created opportunities for sexual commerce. Some establishments began to explicitly combine bathing services with sexual services, reinforcing the church's concerns about moral corruption. The gradual transformation of bathhouses from respectable social centers to morally suspect establishments was accelerated by the arrival of the Black Death in the 14th century. The plague, which devastated European populations, was blamed on various factors, including the supposed moral corruption of society. Bathhouses, with their associations with both physical and moral uncleanliness, became easy targets for those seeking to explain the divine punishment that many believed the plague represented. As the 14th century progressed, city after city began to close their public bathhouses. Sometimes this was due to direct moral pressure from religious authorities. Sometimes it was due to economic factors. as the reduced population after the plague could no longer support such establishments. Sometimes it was due to medical advice, as physicians increasingly warned against the dangers of communal bathing during times of pestilence. The physical closure of bathhouses was often accompanied by legislation restricting their operation. Cities began to pass laws limiting the hours they could operate, restricting mixed-gender bathing, or requiring licenses that were difficult to obtain. The effect was to push bathhouses to the margins of society, where they increasingly became associated with the criminal and the desperate. Picture now the final days of a once grand bathhouse in a medieval city. The elaborate decorations are faded, the stone floors worn smooth by countless feet. The steam still rises from the heated pools, but the clientele has changed. Where once respectable citizens gathered for social bathing, now only the most desperate or defiant continue to use these facilities. The dim lamplight flickers across damp floors, casting long shadows that seem to whisper of better days. The few remaining patrons move quietly, almost furtively, as if aware that they are participating in something that society no longer approves. The decline of public bathhouses marked the end of an era in medieval hygiene. It represented not just a change in bathing practices, but a fundamental shift in how society viewed the relationship between body, cleanliness, and morality. The communal social aspect of cleanliness was replaced by more private individual practices, setting the stage for the bathing customs that would dominate European culture for centuries to come. When we think of soap today, we imagine the gentle, fragrant bars that line our bathroom shelves. Medieval soap was an entirely different creature. The soap available to most people was harsh, crude, and often more effective at removing skin than dirt. Understanding medieval soap requires us to reimagine this most basic of cleansing tools. The process of making soap in medieval times was laborious and dangerous. It required the careful combination of animal fat, usually from pigs or cattle, with lye made from wood ash. The lye was created by soaking ash in water, then filtering the resulting solution. This created a highly alkaline liquid that could cause severe burns if handled carelessly. The fat had to be rendered from animal carcasses, a process that filled the air with unpleasant odors and required significant fuel to maintain the necessary heat. The resulting soap was nothing like the refined products we know today. It was typically formed into large, irregular blocks that were hard and crumbly. The texture was rough, sometimes containing bits of unfiltered ash or impurities from the animal fat. The smell was often offensive, carrying notes of rancid fat and the acrid sharpness of lye. Using this soap was not a pleasant experience, and it was often harsh enough to cause skin irritation or even chemical burns. For the wealthy, however, different options were available. Castile soap, originally made in the Castile region of Spain, represented the pinnacle of medieval soap technology. This soap was made using olive oil instead of animal fat, creating a product that was gentler on the skin and had a more pleasant odor. The olive oil was combined with soda ash, often imported from distant lands, creating a soap that was both effective and luxurious. The importation of Castile soap created a thriving trade network that connected Spanish olive groves with wealthy households across Europe. Merchants would transport these precious bars across treacherous medieval roads, protecting them from bandits and weather alike. The soap was so valuable that it was sometimes used as currency or given as gifts to cement important relationships. The contrast between common soap and Castile soap reflected the broader inequalities of medieval society. While the wealthy could afford to bathe with products that were gentle and pleasant, the common people had to make do with harsh, locally made alternatives. This difference in access to quality cleansing products was just one of many ways that social class determined quality of life in medieval Europe. For those who could not afford even crude soap, alternative cleansing methods were necessary. Ash paste, made by mixing wood ash with water, could be used to scrub away dirt and grease. This mixture was highly alkaline and could be effective at removing stubborn stains, but it was also harsh on the skin and could cause irritation or burns if used too frequently. Perhaps most surprising to modern sensibilities was the use of stale urine as a cleansing agent. Urine contains ammonia, which becomes more concentrated as the urine ages, creating a powerful cleaning solution. This practice was particularly common in the textile industry, where stale urine was used in the fulling process to clean and prepare wool cloth. The ammonia in aged urine could break down grease and remove stains, making it an effective, if unpleasant, cleaning agent. The collection and use of urine for cleaning purposes was a well-established practice in medieval Europe. Households would save urine in large containers, allowing it to age until it reached the proper concentration. The smell was overwhelming, but the cleaning power was undeniable. This practice was so common that it was rarely remarked upon in medieval sources, suggesting that it was simply accepted as a normal part of life. The preparation of these alternative cleansing agents required knowledge and skill. The proper ratio of ash to water, the correct aging time for urine, and the techniques for applying these substances without causing harm all had to be learned and passed down through generations. This knowledge was particularly important for women, who were typically responsible for household cleaning and textile care. The seasonal availability of materials also affected soap and cleansing practices. Wood ash was most abundant after the autumn burning of agricultural waste. Animal fat was most available during the autumn slaughter season when livestock was butchered before winter. These seasonal patterns meant that soap production often occurred at specific times of year, requiring careful planning and storage. The storage of soap and other cleansing materials presented its own challenges. Soap had to be kept dry to prevent it from dissolving, but also protected from rodents and insects that might be attracted to the animal fat content. Lye had to be stored in containers that could resist its corrosive properties. These storage requirements meant that maintaining a supply of cleansing materials required ongoing attention and resources. Given the limitations and unpleasantness of medieval soap, it's perhaps not surprising that alternative cleaning methods were developed. The concept of dry bathing represented a completely different approach to personal hygiene, one that avoided the dangers and discomforts associated with water and soap, while still attempting to maintain some level of cleanliness. Medieval physicians, drawing on classical medical texts and their own observations, recommended what they called friction cleansing. This involved the vigorous rubbing of the skin with cloth, typically linen, to remove dirt and dead skin cells. The theory was that this mechanical action could achieve many of the same benefits as washing with water, while avoiding the dangers of opened pores and exposure to contaminated water sources. The practice of friction cleansing was methodical and thorough. A person would begin by removing their outer clothing, then use a clean linen cloth to rub their entire body systematically. The cloth would be folded and refolded to expose clean surfaces, and the rubbing would continue until the cloth showed visible dirt or the skin appeared clean. This process required significant time and effort, but it was considered both safer and more effective than water bathing. The choice of linen for this purpose was deliberate. Linen was prized for its absorbent properties and its ability to be cleaned and reused. It was also considered more hygienic than other available fabrics, as it could be boiled to remove dirt and potential contaminants. The wealthy would have servants dedicated to maintaining supplies of clean linen for bathing purposes, while common people would carefully preserve and reuse their limited supply of linen cloths. The quality of linen used for bathing varied considerably based on social class. The wealthy could afford fine, soft linen that was gentle on the skin, while the poor made do with coarser, rougher materials that might cause irritation. This difference in quality affected not just comfort, but also the effectiveness of the cleaning process, as finer linen was more absorbent and better at removing dirt and oils. Perhaps even more important than the friction cleansing itself was the medieval practice of frequent clothing changes. Clean clothes were considered essential for maintaining personal hygiene, and the frequent changing of undergarments was seen as a form of washing. The logic was that clean cloth against the skin would absorb sweat, oils, and dirt, effectively cleaning the body without the need for water. Medieval undergarments were typically made of linen and were designed to be worn close to the skin. These garments served multiple purposes. They provided warmth, absorbed bodily secretions, and acted as a barrier between the skin and outer clothing. The regular changing of these undergarments was considered one of the most important aspects of personal hygiene. The frequency of clothing changes varied by social class and season. The wealthy might change their undergarments daily, while common people might change them weekly or even less frequently. The availability of clean clothes was limited by the time and effort required to wash and dry them, as well as by the number of garments a person could afford to own. The washing of clothes presented its own set of challenges. Without modern detergents or washing machines, the process was labor-intensive and time-consuming. Clothes had to be soaked, scrubbed by hand, rinsed multiple times, and then dried. In winter, the drying process could take days, during which the clothes would remain damp and potentially develop mold or mildew. The concept of underwear as a body wipe might seem strange to modern sensibilities, but it was a practical solution to the challenges of medieval hygiene. By wearing absorbent clothing next to the skin and changing it regularly, people could maintain a degree of cleanliness without the risks associated with water bathing. The used undergarments would absorb sweat, oils, and dirt, effectively transferring these substances from the body to the cloth. The social implications of clothing changes were significant. Clean clothes were a sign of respectability and social standing. A person who could afford to change their clothes frequently was demonstrating both their wealth and their commitment to social norms. Conversely, someone who wore dirty or unchanged clothes was marking themselves as poor, lazy, or socially marginal. The textile industry of medieval Europe was largely driven by the demand for clothing that could serve these hygienic purposes. Linen production was a major economic activity, employing thousands of people in the cultivation of flax, the production of linen cloth, and the creation of garments. The quality and quantity of linen available in a region could significantly affect the hygiene practices of its inhabitants. The seasonal nature of textile production also affected hygiene practices. Linen production was tied to the agricultural calendar, with flax harvested in late summer and processed through the autumn and winter months. This meant that the availability of new linen for clothing and bathing purposes was seasonal, requiring careful planning and conservation of existing supplies. The care and maintenance of linen clothing required specialized knowledge and skills. Proper washing techniques, drying methods, and storage practices all had to be learned and applied correctly to maintain the hygiene value of the garments. This knowledge was typically passed down through families, particularly from mothers to daughters, ensuring that the practical aspects of medieval hygiene were preserved and transmitted across generations. In a world where personal cleanliness was limited by available technology and medical understanding, the management of odors became a crucial aspect of daily life. Medieval people were not insensitive to smells, but rather developed different strategies for dealing with the unavoidable reality of a world where strong odors were omnipresent. The medieval city was a symphony of smells, most of them unpleasant by modern standards. Open sewers ran through the streets, carrying human waste and garbage to rivers that already served as sources of drinking water. The smell of human waste was a constant companion in urban areas, where thousands of people lived in close quarters without modern sanitation systems. Tanneries, where animal hides were processed into leather, produced some of the most offensive odors in medieval cities. The process of curing hides involved the use of urine, animal brains, and other organic materials that produced overpowering smells. These facilities were often located on the outskirts of cities, but even at a distance, their odors could be detected throughout the urban area. Slaughterhouses and butcher shops contributed their own distinctive aromas to the medieval olfactory landscape. The smell of blood, offal, and rotting meat was particularly intense during warm weather, when the heat accelerated decomposition. These smells were not just unpleasant, but could also be dangerous, as they attracted flies and other insects that could spread disease. The floors of medieval homes were typically covered with rushes, layers of dried grass and reeds that served as a primitive form of carpeting. These rushes absorbed spills, provided insulation, and could be replaced when they became too dirty or smelly. However, the rushes also trapped food scraps, bodily fluids, and other debris, creating a breeding ground for insects and a source of persistent odors. The practice of strewing herbs among the rushes was one way medieval people attempted to combat household odors. Sweet-smelling herbs like rosemary, thyme, and lavender were scattered on floors to provide pleasant scents, and it was believed to ward off disease. The oils in these herbs could indeed help mask unpleasant odors, though they did little to address the underlying sources of contamination. Personal odor management was addressed through the use of pomanders and aromatic accessories. Pomanders were small containers, often made of silver or other precious metals, that held fragrant substances like spices, herbs, or perfumed wax. These could be worn on the person or carried in pockets, providing a portable source of pleasant scent. The wealthy could afford elaborate pomanders filled with expensive spices like cloves, cinnamon, and nutmeg. These spices were imported from distant lands at great expense, making them luxury items that demonstrated both wealth and sophistication. The pomanders themselves were often works of art, decorated with intricate patterns and precious stones. Common people made do with simpler aromatic solutions. Sprigs of rosemary or other local herbs could be tucked into clothing or hair to provide fragrance. Small cloth sachets filled with dried flowers or herbs could serve a similar purpose. These humble accessories were the medieval equivalent of modern deodorants and perfumes. The seasonal availability of aromatic materials affected odor management practices. Spring and summer provided fresh herbs and flowers, while autumn offered opportunities to dry and preserve aromatic materials for winter use. The careful collection and preservation of these materials required planning and knowledge, adding another layer of complexity to medieval hygiene practices. The social significance of pleasant scents cannot be overstated. In a world where unpleasant odors were common, the ability to smell good was a mark of social distinction. Those who could afford perfumes, pomanders, and aromatic accessories were clearly marking themselves as members of the upper classes. Conversely, those who smelled bad were immediately identified as poor or socially marginal. The connection between scent and health was also important in medieval thinking. Pleasant scents were believed to have medicinal properties, while foul odors were associated with disease and corruption. This belief led to the widespread use of aromatic substances, not just for their pleasant smell, but as a form of preventive medicine. The management of odors in medieval cities was a constant challenge that required both individual and collective action. Cities began to pass laws regulating the disposal of waste and the location of particularly odorous industries. These early sanitation regulations were among the first examples of public health policy in European history. Imagine walking through London in the year 1350 as dusk settles over the city. The air is thick with the mingled scents of wood smoke, human waste, and the countless trades that keep the city alive. The narrow streets echo with the sounds of daily life, the calls of vendors, the clatter of cartwheels on cobblestones, the laughter of children playing in the shadows. Above it all hangs the ever-present awareness of mortality, the knowledge that life is fragile and uncertain in this world where disease and danger lurk around every corner. The decline of medieval bathing culture was dramatically accelerated by the arrival of the Black Death in the 14th century. This devastating pandemic, which killed an estimated one-third of Europe's population, fundamentally changed how people thought about disease, cleanliness, and the relationship between the two. The plague's impact on hygiene practices would be felt for centuries to come. Medieval physicians, struggling to understand the cause of the plague, turned to their traditional medical theories for explanations. The miasma theory, which blamed disease on corrupted air, seemed to provide a ready explanation for the plague's spread. If bad air was causing the disease, then anything that made the body more susceptible to this bad air was inherently dangerous. Hot baths, which were already viewed with suspicion, became particular targets of medical condemnation. Physicians argued that the heat from baths opened the pores of the skin, creating direct pathways for the plague to enter the body. This theory was supported by observations that some people who had recently bathed seemed to fall ill more quickly than those who had not. The medical advice of the time was clear and frightening: avoid hot baths at all costs during times of pestilence. This advice was taken seriously by a population that was desperate for any means of protection against the devastating disease. The few remaining public bathhouses found themselves abandoned as people fled what they now saw as death traps. The physicians' explanations seemed to be supported by observable evidence. The plague did indeed spread quickly in crowded, unsanitary conditions, and bathhouses were often located in the poorest, most crowded parts of cities. The correlation between bathhouses and disease transmission was noted, even if the actual mechanism was misunderstood. What medieval people didn't realize was that the plague was primarily spread by fleas carried by rats, not by mysterious vapors entering through open pores. The bathhouses were dangerous not because hot water opened the skin to disease, but because they were crowded spaces where infected fleas could easily move from person to person. The medical theory was wrong, but the practical advice to avoid crowded public spaces was actually sound. The sudden collapse of bath culture was swift and dramatic. Bathhouses that had operated for centuries closed their doors within months of the plague's arrival. The elaborate infrastructure of medieval bathing, from the heating systems to the specialized tools and furnishings, was abandoned and left to decay. The social networks that had centered around communal bathing dissolved as people retreated into isolation. The economic impact of this collapse was significant. The bathhouse industry had employed thousands of people, from attendants and cleaners to the skilled craftsmen who maintained the heating systems. The sudden closure of these establishments left many people without work, adding to the economic disruption caused by the plague itself. As hot baths fell out of favor, alternative treatments gained popularity. Sweating rooms became the preferred method for those who felt they needed some form of heat therapy. These rooms were designed to promote sweating without the use of hot water, typically through the use of hot stones or heated air. The theory was that sweating could purge the body of corrupted humors without the dangers associated with open pores. The design of sweating rooms varied, but they typically involved a small enclosed space that could be heated to high temperatures. Users would sit in these rooms until they perspired heavily, then exit to cool down gradually. This process was believed to cleanse the body internally while avoiding the external dangers of water bathing. The social aspect of sweating rooms was quite different from that of bathhouses. While bathhouses had been communal spaces where people gathered for social interaction, sweating rooms were typically used individually or in small groups. This shift reflected the broader social changes brought about by the plague, as people became more suspicious of large gatherings and communal activities. The medical justification for sweating rooms was that they worked from the inside out, purging the body of corrupt humors through natural processes rather than artificially opening the pores with hot water. This distinction was important in medieval medical theory, as it suggested that the body was actively cleansing itself rather than passively receiving potentially dangerous influences from the outside. The psychological impact of the plague on hygiene practices cannot be overstated. The association between communal bathing and mass death created a deep-seated fear that persisted long after the immediate threat of the plague had passed. This fear was passed down through generations, creating a cultural memory that associated bathing with danger. The religious interpretation of the plague also played a role in the changing attitudes toward bathing. Many people saw the plague as divine punishment for the moral corruption of society. The bathhouses, with their associations with sexual impropriety and physical indulgence, became symbols of the very corruption that had supposedly brought down God's wrath. The tension between medical necessity and moral concern created a complex landscape of hygiene practices. While some people continued to believe in the health benefits of occasional bathing, they had to balance this against both medical warnings and social disapproval. The result was a fragmented approach to personal cleanliness that varied greatly between individuals and communities. The long-term effects of the plague on European bathing culture were profound and lasting. The infrastructure of medieval bathing was largely destroyed and was not rebuilt for centuries. The social customs and knowledge associated with communal bathing were lost, leaving future generations to rediscover practices that had once been commonplace. Yet even in this atmosphere of fear and suspicion, some bathing continued. The human need for cleanliness and the obvious benefits of washing could not be completely suppressed. What emerged was a more private, individual approach to bathing that would characterize European hygiene practices for centuries to come. While the common people struggled with harsh soaps and limited bathing opportunities, the wealthy elite of medieval Europe maintained elaborate bathing rituals that were both luxurious and symbolic. These rituals provide us with a fascinating glimpse into how the privileged classes approached personal hygiene and what bathing meant beyond mere cleanliness. The construction of a noble's bath was an elaborate affair that required significant resources and skilled craftsmanship. Cedar wood was the preferred material for bathing tubs, as it was both water-resistant and naturally aromatic. The scent of cedar was believed to have medicinal properties, and the wood's natural oils were thought to be beneficial for the skin. The tubs themselves were often large enough to accommodate multiple people, reflecting the social nature of elite bathing. The preparation of bathwater for the nobility was a complex process that involved multiple servants and specialized knowledge. The water had to be heated to precisely the right temperature, which was determined not by thermometers, but by the experienced touch of bath attendants. Too hot, and the water would be dangerous. Too cool, and it would not provide the desired therapeutic benefits. Herb-infused waters were a crucial component of noble bathing rituals. Different herbs were believed to have different properties. Rosemary for memory and mental clarity, lavender for relaxation and sleep, mint for refreshment and cooling. The selection of herbs was often made in consultation with physicians or herbalists, reflecting the medical understanding of the time. The process of creating herbal bath waters was elaborate and time-consuming. Fresh herbs had to be gathered at the proper times, often early in the morning, when their essential oils were most concentrated. These herbs were then steeped in hot water for specific periods, sometimes for hours, to extract their beneficial properties. The resulting aromatic waters were then strained and added to the bath. Silk screens were often used to provide privacy and warmth during noble bathing sessions. These screens were not just functional, but also decorative, often featuring elaborate embroidery or painted scenes. The screens helped create an intimate, enclosed space within larger rooms, allowing for privacy while still maintaining the social aspects of bathing. The arrangement of these screens was considered an art form in itself. They had to be positioned to provide adequate privacy while still allowing for conversation and social interaction. The screens also helped to trap the steam and aromatic vapors from the bath, creating a more intense sensory experience. The actual bathing process for the nobility was a communal activity that involved multiple participants. Family members, close friends, and trusted servants might all be present during a bathing session. This communal aspect served multiple purposes. It provided social interaction, demonstrated trust and intimacy, and allowed for the sharing of news and gossip. The social dynamics of noble bathing sessions were complex and carefully managed. There were rules about who could be present, what topics could be discussed, and how the various participants should behave. These rules varied between different noble households and reflected the broader social hierarchies of medieval society. The shampooing of hair was a particularly elaborate part of noble bathing rituals. Egg yolks were commonly used as a cleansing agent for hair, as they were believed to add shine and softness. The egg yolks were often mixed with vinegar, which helped to remove oils and residue while adding additional shine. This mixture was worked into the hair by skilled servants who had been trained in the proper techniques. The application of egg yolk and vinegar to hair was a delicate process that required skill and experience. The mixture had to be applied evenly, worked through the hair thoroughly, and then rinsed out completely. The temperature of the rinse water was crucial, as water that was too hot would cook the egg yolks, creating a sticky mess that was difficult to remove. Other hair treatments used by the nobility included various oils and herbal preparations. Olive oil was prized for its conditioning properties, while rosemary oil was believed to promote hair growth and prevent baldness. These treatments were often applied before the main washing, allowing them to penetrate the hair shaft and provide maximum benefit. The drying and styling of hair after washing was another elaborate process. The hair was typically toweled dry with fine linen cloths, then combed and arranged while still damp. Skilled servants, often women who specialized in hair care, would know the proper techniques for different hair types and styles. Post-bath powders and treatments were an important part of noble bathing rituals. These powders were made from various ingredients, including crushed flowers, herbs, and spices. They were designed to absorb excess moisture, provide pleasant scents, and offer supposed medicinal benefits. The application of these powders was done by servants using soft brushes or cloth pads. The selection and preparation of post-bath powders was a specialized skill that required knowledge of herbalism and perfumery. Different powders were appropriate for different seasons, different skin types, and different social occasions. The most expensive powders might contain imported spices or rare herbs, making them symbols of wealth and status. The contrast between noble and peasant bathing practices was stark and deliberate. While peasants might splash in cold rivers or scrub themselves with harsh soap, the nobility surrounded themselves with luxury and comfort. This contrast was not just about personal preference, but about social signaling and the maintenance of class distinctions. The elaborate nature of noble bathing rituals served multiple purposes beyond mere cleanliness. They demonstrated wealth and status, provided opportunities for social interaction and political discussion, and reinforced the social hierarchies that governed medieval society. The time and resources devoted to these rituals were a form of conspicuous consumption that marked the participants as members of the elite. The knowledge and skills required to maintain these elaborate bathing rituals were carefully guarded and passed down through generations of skilled servants. This created a specialized class of workers who were valued for their expertise in hygiene and personal care. These servants often held positions of trust and responsibility within noble households. The seasonal nature of noble bathing rituals was also significant. Different herbs and treatments were appropriate for different times of year, reflecting both the availability of materials and the changing needs of the body. Spring baths might emphasize cleansing and renewal, while winter baths might focus on warmth and comfort. The influence of noble bathing practices on broader society was limited but significant. The techniques and materials used by the nobility sometimes filtered down to the merchant classes, though in simplified forms. The association between elaborate bathing and high social status also influenced the aspirations of lower social classes, who might attempt to emulate noble practices within their limited means. While the nobility enjoyed their elaborate bathing rituals, the vast majority of medieval Europeans were peasants who had to approach personal hygiene with practicality and resourcefulness. Their bathing practices were shaped by seasonal availability, economic constraints, and the demands of agricultural life. Yet even within these limitations, peasants developed their own traditions and techniques for maintaining cleanliness. The river dip was perhaps the most common form of bathing for medieval peasants. During the warm months, particularly around midsummer when rivers were at their warmest, peasants would take advantage of natural water sources for bathing. These river dips were often communal affairs, with groups of people from the same village or region gathering at traditional bathing spots. The timing of these river dips was carefully considered. Midsummer fairs and festivals provided occasions when large numbers of people would gather, making communal bathing both practical and social. The warm weather and long daylight hours of midsummer made river bathing more comfortable and safer than at other times of year. Yet, the locations chosen for peasant river bathing were selected for both practical and safety reasons. Spots with slow-moving water were preferred as they were less dangerous for non-swimmers. Areas with sandy or rocky bottoms were chosen over muddy locations, as they provided better footing and cleaner water. The presence of overhanging trees or bushes provided privacy and protection from the elements. The social aspect of peasant river bathing was significant. These gatherings provided opportunities for courtship, gossip, and social bonding that were rare in the isolated agricultural communities where most peasants lived. Young people might meet potential spouses while older adults shared news and information from their various villages. The preparations for communal river bathing involved careful planning and coordination within peasant communities. Women would often organize these events, determining the best times and locations based on their knowledge of local water conditions and seasonal patterns. They would also coordinate the sharing of soap and other cleansing materials, as individual families might not have sufficient supplies for thorough washing. The actual bathing process was conducted with attention to modesty and social propriety. Men and women typically bathed separately, either at different times or in different locations along the river. Children were often bathed by their mothers or other female relatives, while older children might be given more independence in the water. The weekly face and hand washing before Sunday Mass represented another important aspect of peasant hygiene. This practice was both practical and religious, as it prepared people for worship while also providing regular opportunities for basic cleanliness. The timing of this washing was carefully coordinated with the church schedule, ensuring that people appeared clean and respectable for religious services. The preparation for Sunday washing involved heating water over the household fire, a process that required careful planning and fuel management. Wood was a precious resource in many peasant communities, and the extra fuel needed for heating washing water had to be balanced against other household needs. The water was typically heated in large pots or cauldrons, then transferred to smaller vessels for individual washing. The ritual of Sunday washing often involved the entire household. Children would be washed first, followed by adults in order of age or social status within the family. The same water might be used for multiple people, with fresh water added as needed. This practice reflected both the scarcity of clean water and the practical realities of peasant life. The social significance of appearing clean for church cannot be overstated. The weekly gathering for Mass was one of the few times when peasants from different households would come together in a formal setting. Appearing clean and well-groomed was a way of showing respect for God, for the community, and for oneself. Those who appeared dirty or unkempt risked social disapproval and exclusion. Winter bathing presented particular challenges for peasant communities. The cold weather and frozen water sources made traditional river bathing impossible, forcing people to develop alternative methods for maintaining cleanliness during the long winter months. These alternatives were often creative and resourceful, reflecting the ingenuity of people living with limited resources. Snow rubbing was one of the most common winter bathing practices among peasants. Fresh, clean snow was gathered and used to scrub the body, particularly the face and hands. The snow was believed to have cleansing properties, and the cold was thought to be invigorating and healthful. This practice was typically done quickly, as prolonged exposure to cold could be dangerous. The technique of snow rubbing was passed down through generations and varied between different regions and communities. Some people preferred to use snow directly, while others would melt it slightly to create a slush that was easier to apply. The snow was typically gathered from areas that were considered clean and unpolluted, away from roads and animal areas. The physiological effects of snow rubbing were significant. The cold would cause blood vessels to constrict, then dilate rapidly when the person returned to warmth. This process was believed to stimulate circulation and promote health, and indeed it may have had some beneficial effects. However, the practice was also dangerous, particularly for elderly or frail individuals who might not be able to tolerate the extreme cold. The social aspects of winter snow rubbing were different from summer river bathing. This practice was typically done individually or in small family groups, as the cold weather made large gatherings impractical. The brief nature of the activity also limited its social function. though it remained an important part of winter hygiene routines. Seasonal lice combing was another crucial aspect of peasant hygiene practices. Lice infestations were common in medieval Europe, particularly in crowded living conditions where multiple people shared beds and clothing. The regular combing and removal of lice was essential for comfort and health, and it became a ritualized activity that brought families together. The tools used for lice combing were simple but effective. Fine-toothed combs, often made of bone or wood, were used to systematically work through the hair, removing both adult lice and their eggs. The process was time-consuming and required patience, but it was essential for maintaining basic hygiene and preventing the spread of parasites. The technique of lice combing was typically learned in childhood and practiced throughout life. The process involved systematic sectioning of the hair, careful combing of each section, and thorough examination for signs of infestation. The removed lice and eggs were typically killed by crushing or burning, preventing them from reinfesting the same person or spreading to others. The social dynamics of lice combing were complex and intimate. Family members would often help each other with this task, as it was difficult to thoroughly comb one's own hair. The activity provided opportunities for conversation, bonding, and the sharing of news and gossip. Children learned not only the practical techniques, but also the social norms associated with this intimate form of care. The seasonal nature of lice combing reflected the life cycle of these parasites and the changing conditions of medieval life. Lice populations typically peaked during the warmer months when people were more active and in closer contact with each other. The autumn and winter months provided opportunities for more thorough treatments, as people had more time for careful grooming and fewer opportunities for reinfestation. The tools and materials used for lice combing were often shared within communities, reflecting both economic necessity and social cooperation. Families might lend combs to neighbors, or skilled individuals might offer their services to those who needed help. This sharing of resources and skills helped to maintain community health and social cohesion. The effectiveness of peasant lice combing practices was limited by available technology and knowledge. While regular combing could reduce lice populations, it was difficult to achieve complete elimination of infestations. The lack of effective treatment meant that most people simply accepted the presence of lice as a normal part of life, focusing on managing populations rather than eliminating them entirely. The relationship between lice combing and other aspects of peasant hygiene was complex. Clean hair was easier to comb and inspect, encouraging regular washing when possible. The removal of lice also reduced itching and discomfort, improving quality of life and social interactions. The practice thus served multiple functions beyond mere parasite control. The knowledge and skills associated with lice combing were passed down through generations, typically from mothers to daughters. This transmission of knowledge ensured that effective techniques were preserved and refined over time. The practice became deeply embedded in family traditions and cultural practices, creating continuity across generations. The psychological aspects of lice combing were also significant. The intimate nature of the activity created opportunities for emotional bonding and communication. The rhythm of combing could be soothing and meditative, providing relief from the stresses of daily life. The sense of accomplishment from successfully removing parasites provided satisfaction and a feeling of control over one's environment. Picture now a peasant family gathered around their simple hearth on a winter evening, the rhythm of the comb moving through hair creating a gentle counterpoint to the crackling of the fire. The river outside flows dark and cold beneath its coating of ice, its summer warmth now just a memory. The simple act of caring for one another through the long winter months represents both survival and love, a testament to the human capacity for maintaining dignity and connection, even in the most challenging circumstances. As the medieval period progressed into the 15th century, new ideas about bathing and hygiene began to emerge. These changes were driven by several factors: the gradual recovery from the devastation of the Black Death, increased contact with other cultures through trade and travel, and the revival of interest in classical learning that would eventually bloom into the Renaissance. The 15th century saw the emergence of a new generation of physicians who were beginning to question some of the established medical doctrines that had dominated medieval thinking. These doctors, influenced by rediscovered classical texts and their own observations, began to develop more nuanced views about the relationship between bathing and health. The cautious re-endorsement of warm water bathing marked a significant shift in medical thinking. Physicians began to acknowledge that bathing could have beneficial effects, particularly when conducted under proper conditions and with appropriate precautions. This represented a dramatic departure from the blanket condemnation of bathing that had characterized medical advice during the plague years. The medical texts of the late medieval period reflect this changing attitude. Physicians began to distinguish between different types of bathing and their relative risks and benefits. They acknowledged that while communal bathing in contaminated water might be dangerous, private bathing in clean, warm water could be beneficial for both health and cleanliness. The influence of Islamic medical knowledge played a significant role in changing European attitudes toward bathing. Through contact with Islamic scholars and medical texts, European physicians were exposed to different approaches to hygiene and health. Islamic medicine had maintained a more positive view of bathing throughout the medieval period, and this knowledge began to filter into European medical thinking. The development of more sophisticated heating systems made private bathing more practical for wealthy households. Innovations in fireplace design, the development of more efficient heating methods, and improvements in water storage and transport all contributed to making bathing more accessible and comfortable. The invention of wooden cloth tubs represented a significant technological advancement in bathing equipment. These tubs were designed to be used inside rooms rather than in specialized bathhouses, making bathing more private and convenient. The tubs were often lined with cloth to make them more comfortable and to prevent splinters. The design of these wooden tubs reflected both practical needs and aesthetic preferences. They were typically round or oval in shape, with high sides to retain heat and provide privacy. The construction required skilled craftsmanship, as the tubs had to be watertight while remaining relatively lightweight and portable. The use of cloth linings in these tubs served multiple purposes. The cloth provided comfort and warmth, protected the bather from rough wood surfaces, and could be removed for cleaning. Different types of cloth were used for different social classes, with the wealthy using fine linen or silk, while common people may do with coarser materials. The portability of these wooden tubs was an important feature that distinguished them from earlier bathing equipment. They could be moved from room to room as needed, set up near fireplaces for warmth, and stored away when not in use. This flexibility made bathing more practical in the smaller, more private spaces of late medieval homes. The Italian humanists of the 15th century played a crucial role in reviving interest in classical bathing practices. These scholars, inspired by rediscovered Roman texts and archaeological discoveries, began to advocate for a return to the bathing customs of antiquity. They argued that the Romans had achieved superior levels of civilization partly through their attention to personal hygiene and public health. The humanist movement's emphasis on the dignity of the human body contributed to changing attitudes toward bathing. Rather than viewing the body as a source of shame and corruption, humanists began to celebrate the human form as a creation worthy of care and attention. This philosophical shift provided intellectual support for more positive approaches to personal hygiene. The rediscovery of classical medical texts, particularly the works of Galen and Hippocrates, provided alternative medical theories that were more supportive of bathing. These ancient physicians had prescribed bathing for various ailments and had developed sophisticated theories about the relationship between cleanliness and health. The Italian city-states of the 15th century became centers of innovation in bathing practices. Wealthy merchant families began to install elaborate bathing facilities in their homes, drawing inspiration from both classical Roman models and contemporary Islamic practices. These installations demonstrated both wealth and cultural sophistication. The architectural innovations of the Italian Renaissance included the development of specialized bathing rooms within private homes. These rooms were designed specifically for bathing, with features like heated floors, specialized ventilation, and decorative elements that made bathing a more pleasant and aesthetically pleasing experience. The integration of bathing facilities into home design reflected changing attitudes toward privacy and personal space. Rather than viewing bathing as a communal activity, people began to see it as a private, personal practice that should be conducted in intimate family settings. The influence of Italian Renaissance bathing practices gradually spread to other parts of Europe through trade, diplomatic contact, and cultural exchange. Wealthy merchants and nobles who traveled to Italy brought back knowledge of new bathing techniques and technologies, introducing them to their home communities. The development of new cleansing products accompanied the revival of bathing practices. Improved soap-making techniques, the importation of new ingredients, and the development of specialized bathing accessories all contributed to making bathing more pleasant and effective. The creation of specialized bathing attendants and servants reflected the growing importance of personal hygiene among the wealthy. These individuals were trained in the latest bathing techniques and were responsible for maintaining the equipment and supplies needed for elaborate bathing rituals. The medical profession's gradual acceptance of bathing was accompanied by the development of new theories about the relationship between cleanliness and health. Physicians began to argue that proper bathing could prevent disease, improve mental health, and enhance overall well-being. The emergence of printed medical texts helped to spread new ideas about bathing more widely than had been possible in the manuscript era. These texts could be copied and distributed more easily, allowing new medical knowledge to reach a broader audience of physicians and educated lay people. The changing attitudes toward bathing in the late medieval period laid the groundwork for the Renaissance transformation of European hygiene practices. The careful, cautious reintroduction of bathing reflected both the persistence of medieval fears and the growing confidence in human reason and classical learning. The influence of these late medieval developments would be felt for centuries to come. The technologies, techniques, and attitudes that emerged during this period would shape European bathing practices well into the modern era, demonstrating the lasting impact of medieval innovations on subsequent cultural developments. The legacy of medieval bathing practices extends far beyond the medieval period itself, influencing modern attitudes toward hygiene, health, and personal care in ways that are still visible today. Understanding this legacy requires us to separate myth from reality and to appreciate the complex factors that shaped medieval approaches to cleanliness. One of the most persistent misconceptions about medieval hygiene is the idea that everyone in the medieval period was dirty and that people never bathed. This myth has been perpetuated by centuries of cultural stereotyping and historical misunderstanding. The reality is far more complex and nuanced than this simple characterization suggests. Medieval people were not insensitive to cleanliness or unaware of the benefits of washing. They simply had different standards, different methods, and different resources than we do today. The wealthy could afford elaborate bathing rituals while the poor made do with simpler methods. The frequency and methods of bathing varied by social class, season, and region, but most people made some effort to maintain personal cleanliness. The association between medieval people and dirtiness is partly due to the conditions of medieval life rather than medieval attitudes. The lack of running water, the difficulties of heating large quantities of water, and the absence of modern sanitation systems all made maintaining cleanliness more challenging than it is today. However, these practical limitations should not be confused with indifference to hygiene. The medical theories that discouraged bathing were based on the best available knowledge of the time. Medieval physicians were not ignorant or superstitious, but were working within the framework of medical understanding that had been developed over centuries. Their concerns about the dangers of bathing were based on observed correlations between bathing and illness, even if their explanations for these correlations were incorrect. The social and religious factors that influenced medieval bathing practices were complex and varied. While some religious authorities discouraged bathing as a form of worldly indulgence, others recognized its necessity for health and cleanliness. The relationship between religion and hygiene was not uniformly negative, and many religious communities maintained high standards of cleanliness. The economic factors that limited medieval bathing practices were significant but not insurmountable. The cost of fuel for heating water, the expense of soap and other cleansing materials, and the time required for elaborate bathing rituals all made frequent bathing challenging for most people. However, these economic constraints did not prevent all bathing, and people found creative ways to maintain cleanliness within their means. The technological limitations of medieval bathing equipment were real but not absolute. Medieval people developed innovative solutions to the challenges of heating water, containing it, and making bathing comfortable. The wooden tubs, heating systems, and cleansing materials of the medieval period were sophisticated for their time and represented significant achievements in domestic technology. The connection between medieval bathing practices and later European hygiene customs is direct and traceable. The fears and attitudes that developed during the medieval period influenced European approaches to bathing well into the modern era. The association between bathing and disease, the preference for private over communal bathing, and the emphasis on clothing changes as a form of cleanliness all have their roots in medieval practices. The 17th century perfume boom in Europe can be directly traced to medieval approaches to odor management. The emphasis on masking natural body odors with artificial scents, the development of elaborate perfume-making techniques, and the social significance of pleasant scents all build on foundations laid during the medieval period. The modern spa culture that has become so popular in recent decades draws heavily on medieval bathing traditions. The emphasis on bathing as a form of relaxation and therapy, the use of herbal additives and aromatherapy, and the social aspects of spa culture all have medieval precedents. The elaborate bathing rituals of medieval nobility are clearly ancestors of modern spa treatments. The medieval fears about bathing and disease also influenced the development of modern medical understanding. The association between cleanliness and health, the recognition of waterborne diseases, and the emphasis on sanitation all built on medieval observations and theories. While the explanations were often incorrect, the underlying concerns about the relationship between bathing and health were valid. The social aspects of medieval bathing practices continue to influence modern hygiene customs. The privacy concerns that led to the decline of communal bathing, the association between cleanliness and social status, and the role of personal hygiene in social acceptance all have medieval origins. The seasonal patterns of medieval bathing practices can still be observed in modern behavior. The tendency to bathe more frequently in summer than in winter, the association between spring cleaning and personal renewal, and the use of different bathing products for different seasons all reflect medieval precedents. The gender differences in medieval bathing practices have also had lasting influence. The different hygiene expectations for men and women, the specialized knowledge associated with feminine hygiene, and the social dynamics of mixed-gender bathing all have medieval roots that continue to shape modern attitudes. The class distinctions that characterized medieval bathing practices remain visible in modern hygiene culture. The association between expensive personal care products and high social status, the emphasis on luxury bathing experiences, and the social significance of personal grooming all build on medieval precedents. The technological innovations of the medieval period laid the groundwork for modern bathing technology. The development of indoor bathing facilities, the improvement of heating systems, and the creation of specialized bathing equipment all contributed to the eventual development of modern bathroom technology. The economic aspects of medieval bathing practices continue to influence modern hygiene industries. The commercialization of personal care products, the development of specialized bathing services, and the economic significance of the hygiene industry all have medieval precedents. The medical theories that shaped medieval bathing practices, while often incorrect, contributed to the development of modern medical understanding. The recognition of the relationship between cleanliness and health, the understanding of disease transmission, and the emphasis on preventive medicine all built on medieval foundations. The cultural significance of medieval bathing practices extends beyond mere hygiene to encompass broader questions about human dignity, social relationships, and the meaning of cleanliness. These deeper cultural meanings continue to influence modern attitudes toward personal care and social interaction. The environmental aspects of medieval bathing practices offer lessons for modern sustainability efforts. The medieval emphasis on conserving resources, reusing materials, and working within natural limitations provides insights that may be relevant to contemporary environmental challenges. The regional variations in medieval bathing practices demonstrate the importance of local conditions and cultural preferences in shaping hygiene customs. This recognition of diversity and adaptation remains relevant in our increasingly globalized world, where different cultural approaches to cleanliness and personal care continue to coexist and influence each other. As we reach the end of our journey through the landscape of medieval hygiene, let us take a moment to reflect on the images and insights we have gathered along the way. We have seen the steamy interior of medieval bathhouses, where social bonds were forged in warm water and conversation flowed as freely as the heated pools. We have witnessed the elaborate rituals of noble bathing, with their silk screens and herb-infused waters, their skilled attendants, and precious unguents. We have stood beside cold rivers in the depths of winter, watching hardy peasants break through ice to reach the flowing water beneath, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air as they quickly scrub away the accumulation of months. We have sat in humble cottages during the long winter evenings, listening to the gentle rhythm of lice combs working through hair, creating moments of intimacy and care in the midst of hardship. We have explored the workshops of medieval soap makers, where animal fat and harsh lye combined to create cleansing blocks that were both essential and unpleasant. We have wandered through the aromatic gardens, where herbs were gathered for pomanders and bathing waters, their fragrances offering relief from the overwhelming odors of medieval cities. We have witnessed the transformation of medical understanding, from the fear-driven prohibition of bathing during plague times to the cautious revival of water therapy in the late medieval period. We have seen how cultural attitudes, religious beliefs, and practical necessities combined to create a complex tapestry of hygiene practices that varied by class, season, and region. Perhaps most importantly, we have gained an appreciation for the ingenuity and resourcefulness of medieval people in maintaining personal cleanliness despite significant challenges. They developed creative solutions to practical problems, created social customs that served both hygienic and social functions, and maintained standards of personal care that were appropriate to their circumstances and understanding. The medieval approach to hygiene reminds us that cleanliness is not a simple universal concept, but rather a complex cultural practice that reflects deeper values about health, social relationships, and human dignity. The standards and methods that seem natural and obvious to us today are the products of centuries of cultural evolution, technological development, and changing understanding. As we return to our modern world of abundant hot water, gentle soaps, and private bathrooms, we can appreciate these conveniences with new understanding. The ease with which we can maintain personal cleanliness is a luxury that would have been unimaginable to most medieval people. The hot shower that begins our day, the fragrant soap that cleanses our skin, the soft towels that dry our bodies, all of these simple pleasures represent the culmination of centuries of human ingenuity and cultural development. Yet we can also appreciate the aspects of medieval hygiene culture that we have perhaps lost in our modern emphasis on individual privacy and efficiency. The social aspects of bathing, the seasonal rhythms of cleansing practices, the connection between personal care and community relationships. These elements of medieval hygiene culture offer insights that may enrich our understanding of what it means to be clean and healthy. The medieval emphasis on working within natural limitations, conserving resources, and adapting practices to local conditions offers lessons that remain relevant in our contemporary world. The recognition that different circumstances require different approaches to cleanliness and that cultural practices must be sustainable within their environmental and economic context provides wisdom that transcends the specific historical period we have explored. As you prepare for sleep tonight, perhaps you will carry with you some of the images and insights from our medieval journey. The gentle rhythm of water flowing over stones, the fragrant steam rising from herb-infused baths, the patient care of family members helping each other maintain cleanliness and comfort. These images remind us that the basic human needs for cleanliness, care, and dignity transcend the specific methods and technologies available in any given era. The medieval world we have explored was one of both hardship and ingenuity, of practical challenges and creative solutions, of social bonds forged in the shared experience, of maintaining human dignity in difficult circumstances. The people who lived through these times were not so different from us in their basic needs and desires, even if their methods and opportunities were dramatically different. Take a deep breath now and let the scents of rosemary and lavender fill your imagination. Feel the warmth of a gentle fire crackling in the hearth, the soft comfort of clean linen against your skin, the satisfaction of a day's work done, and the promise of rest ahead. Let the rhythm of your breathing slow and deepen, matching the gentle pace of medieval life. where time moved more slowly and the simple pleasures of cleanliness and comfort were treasured all the more for their rarity. The medieval world fades now into the mists of time, but its lessons and insights remain with us. The understanding that cleanliness is a complex cultural practice, that different circumstances require different solutions, and that human dignity can be maintained even in the most challenging conditions. These insights enrich our appreciation of both our medieval ancestors and our modern conveniences. Sleep well, gentle listener, secure in the knowledge that you have glimpsed a world both strange and familiar, both distant and immediate. The medieval approach to hygiene, with all its complexities and contradictions, reminds us that the human quest for cleanliness and dignity is as old as humanity itself, and that each generation must find its own way to meet these fundamental needs. The fire crackles softly in the hearth, the last embers glowing warm and red in the darkness. The scent of herbs lingers in the air, a reminder of the resourcefulness and care that characterized medieval approaches to personal hygiene. Rest now, and let the gentle rhythms of history carry you into peaceful slumber, where dreams of cedar tubs and flowing rivers, of fragrant pomanders and gentle linen, can transport you to a world where cleanliness was both challenge and achievement, both necessity and luxury. Good night, gentle dreamer. May your rest be as peaceful as a medieval monastery at evening prayer, as refreshing as a midsummer dip in a country stream, as restorative as the careful ministrations of skilled bath attendants in a noble household of long ago. The medieval world of hygiene, with all its complexities and contradictions, bids you farewell, leaving you with new appreciation for both the ingenuity of the past and the conveniences of the present.